Hey everyone, this is a new video in the EV conversion of my Volkswagen Bus here. And in this video, we'll be just focusing on simplifying the dashboard cluster. In particular, we'll be redoing this cluster right here, which included the gas gauge and some other things that we no longer need, like oil pressure lights and things like that, as well as adding a tachometer in that clock blank that was there. And then I added a nice mounting plate and redid the front display there and just cleaned it up a little bit, and that's the Warp 9 display piece. As you can see, it's now mounted to a blank out plate for the radio. So stay tuned and see how I did it. Okay, this is my attempt to clean up some of the dashboard here because there's a lot of stuff that is not applicable from the gasoline engine car, and also I wanted to add a tachometer. So here is I took all these little screws out of the backing here. As you can see, that goes in here. Took the screws out and all the light bulbs that go into these various areas. And there's the old gas gauge and the old plate that held the gas gauge and some of these lit things. As you can see, I've got oil, battery, EGR, cat, turn signal, and brights. I only really need brights, turn signal, and that's basically it. I don't need this gas gauge either because I'm going to use either something in the BMS or the controller voltage and current to give me an idea of state of charge. That's still not sure yet. What I did was I took this all apart, obviously took all this out, and this is what I'm left with. And I kind of want to leave it a little bit stock here. So what I did was I just drilled out this a piece of ABS plastic, this little plate here, and I marked in the back where all the holes could go, aligned with the existing assembly. And that's going to screw in right here. And so it's going to be a kind of a blank slate for my instrumentation. So at the top where the old gas gauge would have been is going to be just two holes up here. And I'm just going to mount these, I think these are 12 millimeter LEDs. This is a D, and I'm going to get another one that's the same, which is an R. This is a green, and then the R will be like red or yellow. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a little relay. When the reverse switch gives me 12 volts, it'll flip from the normally closed. This will be on the normally closed, which will light up when the key switch is on, and then the reverse will flip over when the reverse light comes on, and that'll just be like a toggle between the two. And then, so that'll go on these top. And then on these lower ones, I don't need this many holes here. I'm probably just going to use maybe these three, the bottom three. So I'll probably have like turn signal, brights, and a charging indicator. And I don't have the brights at the moment, but if I can get this to focus, this is a nice little 8 millimeter turn signal indicator. That'll go in one of those. I'll have another one that's going to be blue, which will be a brights indicator. And then this one is a little bit different LED, but it'll work. And that is a little charging thing, a little blue charging indicator here. So I'll just have those three going around the bottom here. I'll leave the rest of it, so it'll basically be mostly blank. I'll leave it open. Maybe there'll be a state of charge or something, another display in here in the future, but I'll just kind of leave that open for that. Okay, so that really covers the minimal speedometer gauge cluster that I'm going to have. Then on this side, which is the old clock blank plate, which I have here, I painted it, but I'm going to modify it now. Basically going to drill this out to fit a tachometer. I'm going to try to have a tachometer implementation, which I'll show later with a speed sensor. We'll see how that goes, but it's a little two and a half inch approximately tachometer. And I'm going to drill this plate out and then mount it in there. And then that'll go where the old clock blank was. And then finally, this piece here, this was the net gain warp drive display, and it was pretty rough shape. You can see that I was able to pull the piece off there. It was getting real cloudy and nasty. I pulled that all off, and then I just cleaned it all up. It cleaned up pretty well. The case was a little brittle. I may have to put this standoff, somehow glue that back in. But otherwise, the case looks pretty good, and the display looks really good too. So what I plan on doing here is just getting a cell phone screen protector, not the Gorilla Glass ones, because those can't be cut, but just a regular kind of cheap plastic cell phone screen protector. And I'm gonna basically cut it, lay this over it, and then recut it. I won't recut all this stuff out. I'll probably just cut out, just a hole right here, like a square hole right here, and then just put that onto here, and that'll re-protect all this. And yeah, that's basically it. And then I'm gonna basically put it all back together, and that'll clean up that display and make it look nice and new. Well, I tried to use some of this $11 cell phone screen protectors, but it just did not look right. I basically just wasted it. What I ended up doing was going to Hobby Lobby and getting this 1 mil plexiglass, thin plexiglass sheet. It's got a little skin on it, and cut a little piece off of it and made, this. Kind of nicked it there, got a little crack in it there. It's not the greatest looking thing, but it'll work to protect it. And yeah, it's not the greatest looking, but it protects it. It looks good. If I ever want to try it again, I got plenty more to give it another shot, but I'll do this for now, and that'll put it together. Well, I got my updated dashboard components put in. I see my little revamped display there. Looks a little bit better. And there's my new gauges. I've been testing the new LEDs in here, and so when I turn on, you're gonna hear my vacuum pump, but you see my drive indicators on. I did test with the reverse lighting, having to hook some stuff up in the back, it does switch it over to reverse. When I simulate it from the back, the reverse switch, there's the brights. And then the charging indicator does work when I charge it. The one thing that doesn't work is the turn signal. And let me go ahead and hook it back up and show you what happens with that LED indicator light. Okay, so here's what happens with the turn signal. That's the only thing that doesn't work. When I turn the ignition on, it just buzzes and blinks and does crazy stuff. Now, if I do the turn signal thing, it works fine. It's just the default off position is where it's all kind of cattywampus. Well, I think I figured out the turn signal problem, and this is an issue of I did not fully understand how these indicator lights work. So let me explain this if you're planning on customizing your lights here. If you look at the original cluster of the little dash lights, you notice that one is off on its own and the rest are on this plate looking thing here that has that little surround. If you take the original plating off of it, which was this, you would notice that that number 6 that I have marked there is the brights indicator. And this one is kind of off on its own because it acts differently than all the rest. The brights originally was a bulb. All these bulbs, these little black things, look like this. And you have the bulb, which has a pin on the top part. When you screw it into the chassis, that pin makes contact with the surface that you screw it onto. So that's one pin of the bulb. The other pin of the bulb is on the back side of the connector, right there. I assumed that they were all like the brights in that when you twist in this bulb, notice that it's twisted into the main chassis of this plate here, which is connected to ground. Therefore, that front pin here that touches the chassis is actually the ground. The wire coming in from the backside is the positive, and that's what makes the light glow. That's how the bright signal worked. All the rest of them worked in reverse, actually. In other words, this surface here is electrically isolated from this surface here. This surface here is a ground because we connect all of our grounds to it. But this surface here is connected to this. This is actually a 12 volt positive. A black wire goes onto that, providing 12 volt, in this case, to all the lights on the top side of the light. And on the back side where the wires came in, those were actually the grounds to the light. So the DC current flowed in reverse on those lights. So for the only one, so now that I've moved everything, everything's just here and they're all just on isolated LED circuits, which have a positive and negative wire coming out of them, obviously. So it really doesn't matter now. But what I didn't realize was just for the turn signal, which is this is my turn signal now, it's moved over to here. The wire itself, I assumed was the positive wire, which it really wasn't. The wire going into the back of the bulb was actually the negative. So what I have to do now is I disconnected these. Originally I had all three of these just connected and plugged into the chassis ground. What I'll do is I'll reconnect these two back to chassis ground because the charging indicator and this LED here for the brights now still will operate on 12 volt, on the main wire and then just grounded to the chassis. But this one's going to be different. The turn signal, that blue and red wire, is going to be my ground. That's going to now go onto here. So I'm going to create just put another like spade terminal on this wire here. And that's where the blue and red wire is going to go. The black wire that originally went on here to provide 12 volts, or I guess I can also take it off of my ignition common here. Either way, it's just 12 volts when the ignition's on, will then go to here. And I tried this out in the car and it seemed to fix the problem, except for one thing. It still seemed to make everything blink too fast. So it looks like we'll still have an issue when you retrofit, even from the dash light, when you retrofit, I'll still have to add a resistor to it. So what I did was I measured the resistance of one of these little dash bulbs and it turned out to be about 15 ohms. So I grabbed a little 15 ohm, and this is a 25 watt resistor, which is way overkill, but it's just fine. It's a 15 ohm resistor. And I'm just going to mount this to the casing right here. And this will go, and I've just been kind of testing it out, but I'll chop this up, and this will go on both across the positive and negative of just my turn signal wire. And what that will do is it'll look to the circuit, it'll look like there's still a 15 ohm load on it, even though really it's just a resistor and an LED bulb that has a very small, if any, internal impedance. So I'm going to go ahead and get that wired up and I'll show you the end result and then we'll test it out again. Okay, so here is the rewired back of the assembly here. As you can see, the charging indicator and the brights LEDs are on a constant ground here, and then the positive switchable wires are going to go to their respective wires, and that's the way it was before. Now the turn signal is rewired completely. So on the positive side of the LED, that's going to be going to a positive constant power when the ignition switched on. So that'll be plugged into here. And then the switchable wire will be on the negative side. This will be on the blue and red wire from the turn signal, which switches on and off the ground, which makes it blink. But the 12 volt on the positive side is always applied. So that's the difference. So now that we have it wired up, I'm gonna go ahead and install it in the car, and hopefully this is the last time I pull it out. For this open radio area, what I plan to do is I made this little ABS panel. It's got a little bit of silver paint on it. I accidentally marked it, but it'll be covered up, and that will go in there. But in order to hold it in, what I did was I built I'm sure they probably sell something like this. Sorry, I'm one-handed here. I'm sure they sell something like this, but I just went ahead and made it. I don't know. Built this ugly bracket out of some scrap metal, and it's kind of dirty and whatnot, but it's painted. And yeah, so basically just put badly welded a couple pieces of metal on the back, and these are kind of bent a little bit. And then I drilled and tapped a few holes, one in the middle and two on each, that goes through both of those tabs there. Now that's actually tapped to make it easier on myself to get the screw through it. Yeah, so the idea is that you jam the bottom pieces into kind of behind the vinyl dash, and I have to do this with a screwdriver here, hopefully it won't fall. And when I screw the plate in from the outside, that'll kind of sandwich it all together. That's the idea here, and that'll keep it nice and sturdy. So I'm going to go ahead and screw that all in. And now the reason there's a hole here and here and here, and they're a little bit offset, is because on the outside of this panel, this little cell phone holder thing that's going to hold up my display unit is going to bolt through it. All right, well, that wasn't the easiest thing to get on, but I got it. Look, I'm very glad I tapped those holes here. It at least made it a little bit easier. But yeah, it's on nice and tight. It's not going to move. I can move it a little bit. It's got that rotating mount. And I got my little cord coming out with my little grommet there. So I'm going to go ahead and put this the magnet part on the unit here, and that way it can stick right on there, and then I'll just give it a snug down, and yeah, we'll see how it works. There it is. I'll see if I like that or not. If not, I can always just attach it directly to the backing straight forward, but kind of liked it on that arm so it can curve in a little bit. It's just on the magnet, so you can easily just pull it off and remove it whenever you want it. And I can just put a cell phone there instead. If I end up with some sort of Bluetooth app and my cell phone can be the gauge, then I'll just swap that out with my cell phone. But yeah, I kind of like being able to see it tilted at me. Well, that about does it for this part of the EV restoration video. I think we're pretty successful in getting the gauge clusters cleaned up and refurbished a little bit better. One thing I have in the process here is my transmission is at a rebuild shop, and it is being rebuilt at the moment. I already have done some things off camera, like rebuild and refurbish the entire shifting assembly, including the shifter itself and everything underneath, all the way back to the coupler that will mount it to the transmission. So that's on its way. I have to get back on some garage build videos because I need to get the garage a little more functional, at least with the electrical work, so that I can actually do more work on the bus. But there's a lot still to do. There's a lot more restoration. There's a lot more EV conversion, especially when that transmission comes back in a month. So stick around and subscribe if you haven't already, because we're going to be working on 3 tracks of work in parallel. This bus, the restoration, the EV conversion of it, and of course on the garage. So this will be an exciting summer. I appreciate you watching, and we'll see you on the next one.